The silence of a home has a specific frequency. When a home is happy, the silence is light, filled with the phantom sounds of distant laughter and the comforting hum of a refrigerator. Silence in our house at 3 a.m. was heavy, like the crushing pressure at the bottom of the ocean. I sat in my wingback chair in the corner of the bedroom, a room that had witnessed 15 years of our shared history, and watched my wife sleep. The moonlight cut through the wooden slats of the blinds, tattooing her skin with bars of silver and shadow. She looked like a prisoner of her own making, peaceful in a way that felt like a final insult. "I gave you the only thing a man can never get back," I whispered into the darkness. My voice was a mere tremor, easily swallowed by the shadows. "I gave you my time, my dignity, and a second chance that I had to bleed for. And you used them all as blueprints for a new betrayal." Hi everyone. I'm Thomas. I'm 45, and I teach history at the local high school. My entire professional life is dedicated to the study of the past, of empires that rose on grand promises and fell on whispered lies. I know the blueprints of betrayal, the Trojan horse, the Ides of March, the secret treaties of 1914. Ironic, isn't it? I could see the fall of a civilization 3 centuries ago, but I was utterly blind to the collapse of the woman sleeping 3 feet away from me. Sarah is 41. She possesses a beauty that seems to sharpen with age, like a blade being honed. She's a florist, someone who spends her days arranging life and color into temporary displays. 5 years ago, she did the unthinkable. She didn't just have a fling, she vanished. She ran away with a man named Captain Miller, a soldier she met at a gala. She left a note on the kitchen counter that read, "I need to feel like I'm fighting for something real, not just waiting for the weekend with a man who lives in books." I spent a year in a state of suspended animation. I didn't throw away her toothbrush. I was a man waiting for a ghost to come home. And then, the ghost returned. She came back on a rainy Tuesday, standing on the porch with 2 battered suitcases. Captain Miller had been redeployed, and he hadn't taken his civilian distraction with him. And I was the good man. I opened the door. I let her back into my heart. I thought that if I provided enough stability, I could heal the part of her that constantly reached for the fire. But as I sit here now, feeling the cold weight of a burner phone in my pocket, hidden inside an old baby's first Christmas ornament in the attic, I realize that some people don't want to be healed. They just want a comfortable place to rest between fires. In this opening, we explore the savior complex and the sunk cost fallacy. Thomas, as a history teacher, uses historical metaphors to intellectualize his trauma, which is a form of emotional buffering. He views himself as a scholar of betrayal, yet he is trapped in the cycle of victimization. His decision to take Sarah back was fueled by a need to prove his own moral superiority. He wanted to be the saint of the neighborhood. Sarah's initial betrayal with a military man represents sensation-seeking, a psychological trait where the individual requires high-intensity emotional or physical stimulus to feel validated. The baby's first Christmas ornament is a powerful sensory anchor. It represents the corruption of the family ideal. Thomas's realization that his mercy was actually enabling marks the beginning of his transition from a passive victim to an active observer. For the first 2 years after Sarah's return, we lived in a state of hypernormalcy. We were the couple that everyone pointed to as a miracle of reconciliation. We went to marriage retreats, we took up pottery, we spent our Sunday mornings at the local farmer's market, picking out organic kale and artisanal breads as if the weight of those mundane items could hold our lives down. Sarah was perfect. Too perfect. She was a woman performing the role of a remorseful wife, with the dedication of an actress. She would bring me tea in my study, her hand lingering on my shoulder just a second longer than necessary. She would cry during movies about lost love, looking at me with big, watery eyes as if to say, "See? I'm feeling it too." "You're doing so well, Sarah," I'd tell her, stroking her hair as we watched the evening news. "The past is just a prologue. We've written a better chapter." "I don't deserve you, Tom," she'd whisper back, her voice thick with what I thought was gratitude. And I, in my infinite, arrogant kindness, would tell her she was wrong. But about 6 months ago, the porcelain piece began to crack. It wasn't a sudden break, it was a slow, agonizing change in the atmosphere. The air in our house, once filled with the scent of Sarah's floral arrangements and wood smoke, started to feel thin. Sarah started taking on extra projects for her shop. "The downtown expansion is a nightmare, Tom," she'd say, her fingers tapping a rapid, nervous rhythm on the steering wheel of her car. "The contractor, Marcus, is a total perfectionist. He calls me at all hours about the refrigeration units for the lilies. He's so arrogant, honestly." I noticed the shifts in her physical presence first. She started wearing a specific perfume again, something heavy and musk-based that she hadn't touched since the Miller year. She began locking her phone with a new passcode, and she'd tilt the screen away from me whenever we were on the couch. It was like a dance I had seen before, the steps familiar and sickening. Then there was the neighbor, Mr. Henderson. He's a retired postal worker, the kind of man who notices which cars are in which driveways at 11 a.m. He stopped me while I was raking leaves one afternoon. The air was crisp, the smell of decaying oak leaves thick in the yard. "Your wife's shop must be doing well, Thomas," he said, leaning over the fence. "That black truck is over here nearly every Tuesday morning after you head to the school. I figured they were delivering mulch or something, but the driver, he doesn't look like a delivery boy." I felt a cold prickle of sweat down my spine. "Tuesday is the delivery day, Bill. New stock from the hothouses." "Funny-looking delivery truck," Bill muttered, shuffling away. "Low-profile tires. Chrome rims. Looks more like a contractor's toy to me." I went back to raking, but my hands were shaking so hard the wooden handle of the rake felt like it was buzzing. I started noticing the micro-deceptions. Sarah would come home and immediately head for the shower, the steam hiding the scent of a soap that wasn't ours. She'd mention Marcus again at dinner, always with a tone of mild annoyance. "Marcus messed up the floor plan again," she'd say, stabbing at her pasta. I had to spend 3 hours at the site correcting him. It was the same tactic she used with the soldier. She'd criticize the man she was sleeping with to make him seem like an adversary rather than a lover. I'd sit across from her, watching her micro-expressions, the way her pupils dilated when her phone vibrated, the way she'd avoid my gaze by focusing intensely on her wine glass. I began to realize that our kintsugi marriage, the one I thought was mended with gold, was actually just glued together with her lies and my desperate need to be a hero. And the glue was starting to melt in the heat of a new secret. Here analyzes how normalcy bias dictates Thomas's actions. Even as his gut screams at him through physical symptoms, the shaking hands, the cold sweat, his actions remain those of a supportive husband. He defends Sarah to the neighbor because to admit the truth to Bill would be to admit his own failure as a healer. Sarah's actions are a textbook case of compartmentalization. She uses her job as a landscape for her affair, making Marcus both a villain and a lover in her narrative. This creates a psychological smoke screen that Thomas, as a man of logic, finds difficult to penetrate until the evidence becomes undeniable. The contrast between the organic kale lifestyle and the musk perfume highlights the growing rift between their presented reality and the hidden truth. The following month was a slow-motion car crash. I started noticing that Sarah's work late nights always coincided with the days I had parent-teacher conferences. It was too surgical, too planned. The historian in me knew that you cannot ignore primary sources, so I began to create my own. I bought a small digital recorder and hid it under the passenger seat of her SUV. I felt like a criminal, a trespasser in my own marriage, but the alternative, living in a fog of gaslighting, was worse. When I played the recording back for the first time, sitting in my car at a park 3 miles from our house, the sound of her voice laughing with Marcus made the world turn gray. "He's so oblivious," Marcus's voice rumbled through the speakers. "Does he really think you're working on refrigeration units at 9 p.m.? Tom sees what he wants to see," Sarah replied, and the coldness in her tone was a blade to my heart. He needs to be the saint. It's his favorite role. As long as I play the remorseful wife for an hour a day, he stays in his study with his books. I sat there for a long time, watching a young couple walk their dog. They looked happy. I wondered if they were lying to each other too. The investigation moved to the house. I waited until Sarah went to her Pilates class on a Saturday morning. I went to the attic. It was hot, smelling of dust and stagnant air. I moved past the boxes of my historical journals and headed for the Christmas decorations. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. I found the box labeled Sarah's Childhood. Tucked inside a hollowed-out baby's first Christmas ornament, the one we bought when we thought we'd have a family of our own, was the burner phone. My fingers were ice cold as I turned it on. The wallpaper was a photo of them. They were in a car, her head on his shoulder, both of them smiling with a radiance she hadn't shown me in years. I scrolled through the messages. It wasn't just lust, it was a conspiracy. He's so weak, Marcus. He'll forgive anything if I cry a little. He's afraid to be alone. I've got the private account up to 10,000. One more month and I can move out while he's at the history convention in Chicago. I sat on the dusty attic floor, surrounded by tinsel and plastic reindeer, and I felt a strange, terrifying calm. I wasn't the history teacher anymore. I was a man witnessing the final, inevitable fall of his own empire. I realized that my forgiveness hadn't been an act of love, it had been an act of self-betrayal. I had taught her exactly how to destroy me by showing her that my mercy had no bottom. I wasn't a saint, I was an enabler. And the good man was finally dead. The primary mistake Thomas made was unconditional forgiveness without accountability. By taking Sarah back after the first affair without requiring deep, systemic changes, he signaled that his boundaries were negotiable. He learns the hard lesson that grace without truth is just a license to sin. Sarah's psychological profile reveals a dark triad trait, specifically a lack of empathy and a high degree of manipulation. She views Thomas's kindness not as a gift, but as a weakness to be exploited. The burner phone in the baby's first Christmas ornament is the ultimate symbol of her desecration of their shared values. Thomas's lesson is the shift from mercy to forensic reality. He realizes he cannot fix a person who views his efforts as a tool for their own escape. I didn't confront her that night. I didn't even mention the phone. I put it back exactly where I found it. I spent the next 2 weeks moving my own pieces across the board. I met with a lawyer, a shark of a man who specialized in high-conflict divorces. I moved my personal savings to an account she couldn't touch. I documented everything. I waited for the Sunday before my Chicago convention. I wanted the confrontation to happen in the very heart of the lie we had built together. I spent the afternoon cooking. I made roasted lamb with rosemary, her favorite. I set the mahogany dining table with our finest china. I polished the silver until it shone like surgical steel. Sarah walked in at 6:30 p.m., humming a tune. She looked beautiful in a new silk blouse I'd never seen. "Oh, Tom. This looks incredible. What's the occasion?" "I wanted to celebrate, Sarah," I said, my voice as steady as a heartbeat. 15 years of marriage. 5 years since your return. It's a lot of history to process. We sat down. The flickering candlelight cast long, dancing shadows across the room. We ate in a silence that I let stretch until it became uncomfortable. Sarah was the first to break it, her fork clinking nervously. "You're very quiet tonight, Tom. Is something wrong?" "I've been thinking about the fall of Rome, Sarah. It didn't happen because of the Goths. It happened because the internal trust was so degraded that the people forgot what was real. They lived in a theater of lies." "Tom, you're doing that teacher thing again," she laughed, but the laugh was brittle. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the digital recorder. I pressed play. Her own voice filled the room, mocking my saint persona. Sarah's face turned the color of ash. She dropped her fork, it clattered onto the china with a sound like a bone breaking. I also found the ornament in the attic, Sarah, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. The one with the burner phone. And the private bank account. Tom, I can explain. Marcus, he manipulated me. I was feeling lonely again, and... No, I said, cutting her off. That saint was gone. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. You didn't come back to me because you loved me. You came back because I was a safe harbor where you could rest before your next voyage. You used my mercy as a weapon. You laughed at my kindness. I was going to tell you, she sobbed, the tears starting, the same tears that had worked 5 years ago. I was just scared. Please, Tom, we can fix this. I'll go to therapy, I'll delete his number. It's too late for therapy, Sarah. The bridge is gone. I didn't just find out you're cheating. I found out you're planning to rob me and leave while I'm in Chicago. You aren't a wife. You're a parasite. I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't break anything. I just felt finished. The lawyer is waiting for your call. Your bags are already in the mudroom. I packed them this afternoon while you were at the shop. Use the back door, Sarah. It's the one you've been using for months anyway. In this part identifies the final collapse of the persona. The first betrayal was a crack, the second betrayal is the total structural failure. Sarah's attempt to use the same tears of remorse strategy fails because Thomas has undergone a psychological hardening. He identifies the exact moment of the point of no return. It wasn't the physical act of cheating, but the recorded mockery of his character. This revelation shifted the conflict from infidelity to betrayal of identity. By packing her bags and directing her to the back door, Thomas reclaims the power dynamic of the home. He transitions from the safe harbor to the storm that Sarah herself created. The week following the confrontation was a blur of legal documents and cold, clinical interactions. Sarah tried everything. First, it was the desperation phase, dozens of texts promising she would change, but Marcus was nothing to her. Then, it turned to vindictiveness. She tried to freeze the joint account, only to find I had already protected it. I stayed in the house. Every room felt different. The porcelain piece was gone, replaced by a stark, hollow reality. I realized that for 5 years, I had been living in a museum dedicated to a woman who didn't exist. I spent the evenings clearing out her things. The floral scents, the silk scarves, the baby's first Christmas ornament, I didn't burn them. I donated them. They didn't belong in my history anymore. My decision was final. There would be no third chance. I realized that my desire to save her was actually a form of ego. I wanted to be the hero of the story. But a real hero knows when to stop fighting a lost cause. I met with Marcus once, at the lawyer's office during a mediation session. He looked different without the black truck and the arrogance Sarah had described. He looked tired. He looked like a man who had realized he was just the next safe harbor in a long line of them. We didn't speak. We just exchanged a look of mutual, exhausted understanding. I signed the final papers on a Tuesday morning, the same day the black truck used to pull into my driveway. As I walked out of the courthouse, the air felt incredibly clear. I wasn't the saint of the neighborhood anymore. I was just Thomas. And for the first time in 15 years, that was enough. Here explores post-traumatic growth. Thomas's decision to move from martyr to self-preservationist is the key psychological shift. He reflects on his own Messiah complex, realizing that his forgiveness was partially fueled by a desire to feel morally superior. By letting go of that role, he achieves true emotional freedom. The encounter with Marcus provides a comparative insight. Thomas sees that the other man is not a victor, but merely the next victim in Sarah's cycle of sensation-seeking. This de-escalates Thomas's anger and turns it into a detached observation of Sarah's pathology. The empty palace of the house becomes a blank slate for Thomas's new life. It has been 18 months since Sarah walked out through the mudroom. I still live in the house, but I've repainted every room. The saint's study is now a bright, airy library filled with the books I actually enjoy, not just the ones that make me look like a scholar. I still teach history, but my lectures have changed. I don't just talk about the fall of empires, I talk about the importance of internal integrity. I tell my students that a structure is only as strong as its smallest joint. If the trust is hollow, the whole thing is just waiting for a breeze to knock it down. I'm dating a woman named Elena. She's an architect, someone who understands that foundations matter more than the paint on the walls. We take things slow. There are no grand reconciliations, no baby's first Christmas ornaments hidden in the attic. There is just the quiet, steady truth of being with someone who means what they say. I saw Sarah a few months ago. She was at a grocery store, looking for a specific type of lily. She looked older. She was alone. We didn't speak, but she saw me. She saw the way I looked at the world now, not with the desperate hope of a man trying to save a ghost, but with the calm eyes of a man who finally knows his own worth. I realized that the 15 years weren't a waste. They were a masterclass in human nature. I learned that you can't love someone into being loyal. You can only love someone who is already whole. Would you forgive a second betrayal? Or is once more than enough? The story of Thomas and Sarah is a psychological autopsy of a double betrayal. The narrative arc follows the journey from naive mercy to empowered truth. The central lesson is that forgiveness is a gift, not a strategy. When Thomas used it as a strategy to save Sarah, he failed. When he used the truth to save himself, he succeeded. Sarah's character represents the chronic transgressor, someone whose internal lack of stability forces them to seek external validation through betrayal. Thomas's growth is found in his transition from history teacher, observer of the past, to forensic psychologist, analyzer of the present. The double twist lies in the fact that the second betrayal was not just a repeat of the first, but an escalation into financial and psychological warfare. The story closes with the realization that resilience is built on reality, not illusion. Thomas is no longer the saint, but he is finally a man.